Hi, I'm Leslie Vernick, and I have written a brand new book called The Emotionally Destructive Marriage: How to Find Your Voice and Reclaim Your Hope. What does it take to heal a destructive marriage? Certainly, as Christians, our goal is to keep a marriage together, but not at any cost or at any price. If you're a people helper and you're listening to this video, it's important that we be careful not to be like the prophets of Jeremiah's day, who promised peace, peace, when there was no peace. And so when working with couples in destructive and abusive marriages, I think it's really important that we understand what it takes to put a marriage back together in a godly way. And if one of them won't do the work, then what? Do you just stay legally married even when you're relationally separated or even divorced? God gives us a means for healing broken and damaged relationships, but His blueprint for this is not unilateral. Healing a destructive marriage can never be the sole responsibility of one person in the relationship. It always takes two people willing to work to achieve godly change. There needs to be forgiveness sought and forgiveness granted. There needs to be amends made and a willingness to rebuild trust. There needs to be constructive feedback given and willingly received. And when one person in the relationship refuses to participate, or take responsibility for his or her part, healing or restoration of the relationship cannot fully take place. So what I want to do in the next few sessions is give you a few mile markers that will help you identify where you are on this healing journey, or whether you're even on the right path to getting there. The first mile marker is safety. Now, safety in an intimate relationship, such as marriage, must never be underestimated. You cannot put a marriage together in a healthy way if one person in a marriage feels afraid of the other. Without question, whenever there's any kind of physical abuse, destruction of property, or threats against one's person or others, there is no safety. A couple of weeks ago, Shirley emailed me and she wrote, "My counselor says I must allow my husband back into the home if I want our marriage to heal." The counselor said, "How can we work on our marriage if we're not living together?" So I emailed Shirley back and I said, "Well, what are your concerns about your husband moving back home?" She said, "We've been separated for over a year. He left the home because he gave me a black eye. It wasn't the first time he hit me, but it was the worst time. And I never pressed charges or called the police, but I did ask my church for help, and they told him he'd have to leave for a little bit. But honestly, I haven't seen any real changes over this entire year, and my church counselor wants me to let him back home. He says Ray is changing, but I don't see much change. I agree he hasn't hit me for a long time, but the underlying attitudes of entitlement are still there." So I asked Shirley to give me a couple of examples. And this is what she said. "He still badgers me. Whenever I disagree, he wants me to give in to his point of view. When he visits the kids at our house and I tell him I'm tired or I want him to leave, he tells me I'm being selfish and I'm only thinking about myself. He thinks it's okay if he walks into our house without knocking, even though I've asked him many times not to. And if he won't respect my simple requests when we're separated, how can I trust that he's going to respect my boundaries when he moves back home?" "I won't," he told her. "Either he's not willing to respect you or he's not capable of respecting you yet, but either way, it is not safe for him to move back home until he learns to do so." And so my advice to Shirley was to please stick up for yourself with your counselor. Before you can work on your marriage, your husband needs to demonstrate that he values the importance of your safety and that he can control himself and honor your boundaries and your feelings without badgering you or retaliating when you won't give him what he wants. And if he won't do this much for you, Shirley, you can't go any further in repairing your marriage. Now, there are sometimes other issues of safety that also must be resolved to some degree if a marriage is going to be wisely restored. For example, Gina's husband, Matthew, feels entitled to keep his money in a separate bank account with only his name on it. Now, each week he gives Gina an allowance for food and household expenses, but he requires her to give him a detailed accounting of everything she spent with receipts. Gina's an educated woman. She's an RN, but for now, she and her husband have decided that she would stay home and homeschool their 4 children. But Gina does not feel financially safe. She feels like a child when she's being given an allowance and has to have an account of everything she spends, yet her husband Matthew refuses to give an account for what he spends. In fact, he doesn't even tell Gina what he earns. He says it's his money. Gina feels very vulnerable financially and scared whenever Matthew travels. What if something happened to him and she ran out of cash? When she's expressed her concerns to her husband, he tells her not to worry, nothing's going to happen to him. Legally, Gina is an adult. She's considered an equal partner in their financial responsibilities, yet she has no voice, no power, and absolutely no idea what's happening with their financial assets. Should she submit to Matthew when he says she's not allowed to have a credit card, even though she's never been irresponsible with money? In fact, Gina's observed Matthew being irresponsible and deceitful with money and with his business expenses. What if Matthew's been deceitful in other ways? What if he's underreported their income taxes? Gina would be held equally responsible even if she didn't know. Or what if he's not paying their mortgage or home equity loan faithfully? She wouldn't know that, and yet the financial consequences of his irresponsibility and deceit would fall equally on Gina's shoulders. Gina and Matthew will never have a healthy marriage if these issues are not discussed with the underlying imbalance of power and control changed. And I am dismayed at the number of counselors, pastors, people helpers, lay leaders, and marriage mentors who don't understand safety issues must come first. There can be no constructive conversation about other marital issues, nor can there be any joint marital counseling if one person can't talk honestly or isn't safe to tell the truth or disagree without fear of physical, emotional, sexual, financial, or spiritual retaliation. Next week, I'll talk about the second mile marker, sanity, crucial to restoring a destructive marriage.